Hi, and welcome to Bloody Good Reads. I'm your host, Mark Goddard. And as always, we are going back onto the crime train. I've been doing a lot of crime recently, and I'm really loving getting back into the crime genre. I've mentioned it before quite a few times, even though I do love horror. I am also a bigger fan of the crime genre. So we're going to be doing a bit more crime going forward, more because I love doing crime. But this week's guest has three amazing books out and one brand new book coming out already come out this month in July. All with some amazing plot twists and plot lines, which I'm really excited to talk about. So, welcome to the podcast this week, Eve Smith.
Oh, thank you very much, Mark. It's great to be here.
No worries. So what we like to do here on Bloody Good Reads is force authors to pick three books they love, because I am a bastard. But before we get on to that, and before we get into the amazing book one, what I like to ask all of my guests is, how did you get into the horror? No, sorry, how did you get into the crime genre?
Well, actually, I was also into horror, so this is
Ah,
the good
there you
this is
go.
good news. I love both. So I think, well, I like the whole crime Agatha Christie piece, and I did used to sort of absolutely devour her books when I was younger. Uh, but then I also was a big fantasy fan. I loved Lord of the Rings, and I literally remember getting that out, the three books out of the library, and never wanting that to end. But I was a big fan of horror in my teens, and I loved Stephen King, and I used to watch quite a lot as well. So you remember those old Hammer House of Horror double bills?
Oh,
I
definitely.
used to be on I may well be a lot older than you. I don't know, Mark, but I used to have them in black and white on a Friday night, and they'd have all these sort of Edgar Allan Poe adaptations, and I absolutely loved them. So I sort of guzzled those. And then a bit after that, in my 20s, I guess, I came across The Handmaid's Tale, the first film adaptation, and it blew me away by Margaret Atwood. So I then went out and bought everything I could from her. So I think I've sort of straddled crime, horror, speculative, and that's probably kind of why I write what I do, really, which is a sort of, it crosses the genres between speculative and thriller, and hopefully there's a bit of terror in there too.
I was going to say, 'cause the kind of the plot lines in all three of your books are, they do have that kind of horror tinge to it, this kind of dystopian feeling, or kind of this.
Absolutely.
It's like a what if kind of universe in a way. So yeah, I mean, again,
Exactly.
looking forward to getting to that one as well. So what got you into kind of writing yourself? Was it more of a kind of childhood hobby, saying from university?
Yeah, well, I did used to write a lot of stories when I was younger, um, and yeah, I inflicted them on my family. And my mum, I think, used to post them off to unsuspecting relatives at Christmas.
Hmm.
But then during school and then the sort of first years of work, yeah, everything just, I totally went away from it. I didn't even think about writing. And it was only really about 10 years ago when I had a little break from my job and I joined a creative writing group to just sort of, I thought I really wanted to do something a bit more creative.
Hmm.
And it was just at my local theatre. It wasn't a formal course or anything, but it was run by a local playwright. And I just remembered how much I loved to write. And that was really when I just had this crazy idea that I would write a novel in a year, as you do, get
As
it
you do.
published. How naive could I be? So yeah, it was literally that. I just thought I'd go on this course, and it just triggered me right back. And yeah, that's really when I completely changed direction and stopped what I was doing before and basically tried to get published.
So was that going to be the waiting room that you wrote first, or was it?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
so
right. Yeah,
brilliant. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you did what you were set out to do, which is brilliant. So
Not within a year, though, Mark. I can
oh
tell
yeah.
you that. It took a bit longer than that. I think if I'd known how difficult it was and how long it might have taken, I
Mm.
may have just sort of defaulted to, oh no, I'll just go and get another job right now. But yes, it did happen, and I'm yeah, still kick myself sometimes.
So let's talk about the waiting rooms then. So your first novel, um,
Yes.
No Drugs, No Miracles, Just Fear. It's such a great kind of plotline. Like, so if again, it's like a what if kind of universe. I kind of class it as, which is if antibiotics don't stopped working, where would we be, kind of thing. Anything could possibly kill you. So where did the idea for the waiting room come about?
Well, I do read quite a lot, and I listen to a lot of podcasts and radio, and I am very interested in the whole science world. I always have been, even though I didn't do science as in my degree or anything. So, but I used to work with scientists quite a bit in my previous job, and I read an article, I think it was in 2015, that talked about antibiotic resistance, and it said that if we didn't get on top of things, by 2050, 10 million people a year, every year, would be dying from antibiotic resistant infections. And I read that number and I just thought, oh my God, what? Nobody's even talking about this. This is pre-COVID. That is a massive, massive numbers. And I just thought, oh my God. So I looked into it a bit more. And sure enough, it was one of these, in fact, they call it the invisible pandemic because it's really out there. It's a very serious problem, but no one really at that point was publishing much about it. So I just thought, okay, I'm going to have to do that. And so then I researched a bit more about it. And of course, the main users of antibiotics are the very young and the very old. So I thought if it came to it and we were faced with this antibiotic resistant pandemic, society would have to make a choice. And so the premise is that it gets to a point where if you are over 70, you no longer get access to the drugs. And you're sent to these hospitals that are nicknamed the waiting rooms where no one ever gets well. And
Mm.
that is where the idea came.
Yeah. It's kind of on the edge of sci-fi, horror, and thriller, which is a lovely little mix for me. And such a great
You.
storyline as well. So before we get on to Off Target as well, which is your second book,
Yes.
um, again, what we like to do here on the podcast is force authors to pick 3 books they love. So what is the
Yes.
first book you brought along today?
So the first book I brought along is one by my absolute sort of heroine, Margaret Atwood.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have picked any of hers, but the one I picked is called Oryx and Crake. And
Okay.
I actually read this again as research for my second book, Off Target, which is based all around gene editing. And it is a fantastic book that really shows the potential horrors and downsides if genetic engineering runs amok. And it's part of the Mad Adam trilogy. So this is the first book in the series. And basically, when you start the story and you know that there's been some terrible calamitous disaster because there only appears to be one person left on Earth, which is this sort of solitary tramp called Snowman. And as the story unfolds, it mixes between the present and the past. And I love that. I love when time mixes up and it tells you the story of what actually happened. You get little pieces that are sort of scattered, and so you gradually piece together what the terrible crisis was. But she's just got some fantastic creations in there. For example, there's this sort of animal called the pigoon, which is a very very dangerous combination of primate cunning and pigs. So they're transgenic pigs with human brain tissues, and they are very smart. And Snowman's always having to be really careful because these animals appear to sort of be running loose and looking for any likely food targets. So it's a very there's at times it's quite black humor, but it is such a well constructed story and a very cautionary tale that really challenges you to think about, how far should we go with playing around with gene editing and the whole sort of modification of creatures, that we create for our own entertainment or use. And what happens when that power is in the hands of a very, very few, powerful corporates. So yeah, I'd really recommend it. It's a great read.
Brilliant choice. Brilliant choice. It's not been picked before. We've had Handmaid's Tale before, so obviously because
Uh-huh.
such a big title. No,
Yes.
that's a very interesting one, and in a way, a nice little segue into your second book as well, which is about genetic engineering. So nicely
Exactly.
put. So obviously, after the success of the first book, you go off to do Off Target. So more about genetic engineering and having children. So where did the idea for this one come about?
So
We
again,
don't ask the hard hitting questions here.
don't worry. No, I'm loving it. Don't worry. Yes. So again, because I do read quite a bit. I'm very interested in this whole idea for gene editing, and in fact, I'd had this idea actually before I even got the contract for the waiting room. So I'd already started to plot out the synopsis for this one, and I was quite excited because there's been such amazing developments in gene editing. There's this whole new process called CRISPR-Cas9, which has basically made it. I mean, when I say simple, clearly I wouldn't be able to do it. It's not like you can just nip off and quickly gene edit the odd organism, but it has simplified it so much for people that understand, how to carry out these procedures. And it's literally like a genetic cut and paste.
Mm,
So the whole area of gene editing has just rushed on, and in combination with that, the whole tech piece as well. So I just was very interested in this whole area, and the woman, Jennifer Doudna, who introduced this new technique, was interviewed, and I always remember she said that she'd had a nightmare. So after it took off and everything, she had had this nightmare where Hitler came to visit her.
mm,
And for some reason, he was wearing a pig mask, and he asked her to tell him about her invention, which is
okay.
haunting.
Mm,
Because, of course, the dangers of gene editing, there's some fantastic upsides, where you can effectively wipe out horrendous diseases, horrendous inherited diseases, like muscular dystrophy and all kinds of other horrible, horrible terminal illnesses. But of course, the danger is if it's not regulated tightly, that people can start to do other things as well. And that was really what I wanted to explore in Off Target, because in Off Target, we have a situation where genetic engineering of children is becoming more and more common.
mm,
And whilst it's quite regulated in the UK, people can go abroad and get more and more add-ons. So as well as having IVF at the same time, they can choose to have their embryos screened and then to have various changes made, not just to eliminate disease, but potentially to enhance certain aspects. And
mm,
this is the dangerous area. So I kind of my main character, Susan, she's been desperate to have a child for years, and she finally gets pregnant, unfortunately, on a one night stand. So she's faced with this terrible dilemma. Should she knows if she tells her husband, he will insist that she has a termination, but she doesn't know if she'll ever get pregnant again. And then she meets this ambitious fertility consultant, who, funnily enough, happened to be from the Ukraine. This was before the Ukraine war,
mhm.
and he offers her a third choice. And so she makes a terrible decision, and guess what? It has quite terrible consequences.
As you
So
do.
that's where that came from.
Well, that's an amazing plotline. I love. Again, on all three books, it's you must love doing the research on this and going kind of deep diving. It must be a rabbit hole of a kind of of subjects that you're going through.
Oh, you are so right. And I have to really be like quite brutal with myself, because I love the research part. You're so right. And I
Mm,
could spend my entire time down the rabbit hole. And funny enough, with Off Target, I think I did spend a bit too long down the rabbit hole. So I had to
mm,
cut a little bit out. Because of course, at the end of the day, I'm writing books to entertain. They need to be good pacey thrillers.
mm.
And so I do tend to fall in love with my research and think, oh well, why on earth wouldn't somebody find this incredibly technical detail about gene editing wonderfully interesting? So I have to edit that, because some of the in order to communicate the idea, I do have to put quite a bit of science stuff in, but I've got to make it palatable and digestible. And so I do spend a huge amount of time just whittling it down, whittling and whittling and whittling, so that hopefully what you end up with is a book where, yes, there's new information in there that perhaps you didn't know before, but it's communicated in a fun way, and it doesn't slow down the plot. So that's the challenge, really.
Because you don't want to be too kind of heavy-handed with it as well, because that will obviously
No,
put a lot of people off. But you want to also put that fun kind of research element of it as well. So yeah, no, I get that.
exactly.
Yeah.
No, but it's good. I'm kind of, my aim is really to like create fun, not well, fun, hopefully terrifying, books, but that books that
Mm.
make people feel something, but also make people think, and that's what I love. And some, the reviews and the readers that I meet, it makes them think, what would I do? Exactly like you said, this what if scenario. That's exactly what I'm trying to create, and I actually want readers to put themselves in my character's shoes, like with Susan. What would you do? If you were desperate for a child and you hadn't been able to have one, and then all of a sudden you're faced with this opportunity to potentially try out some untested, scientific procedure, would you do it? People that want children, infertility is such a difficult thing to bear. So, some people are prepared to go to extraordinary lengths to have a child. And so I just, that's what I wanted to explore, really.
And if we segue into your new book, which is about trying not to have a second child.
Exactly the
So,
opposite. We're going in the other direction.
the opposite. And again, more kind of a sci-fi kind of edge to it as well, kind of like a probably near future kind of thing, but still with that thriller, some even slightly again horror kind of
Yes,
subgenre in it again. So
exactly.
your brand new book, One, which
Yes.
comes out this July, so it'll be out by the time the podcast is out. Um, what would happen if the law was you can only have one child, but then you have another child?
Mhm.
And a dilemma of obviously the new task force that comes down to kind of having to make that decision. So I'm going to ask again, like I always do, what is the plot? Where did the idea come from? Because
Absolutely.
it's such an amazing kind of plot line, which you could kind of see happening in a way. Um,
Mm. Well, it has happened, as you
well,
know, in
yeah,
China.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Um,
yeah,
so yes, so I thought, well, there were two key inspirations of this one actually. So the book is set in, a climate ravaged Britain.
mm,
And actually, it's because of the climate crisis has created all kinds of problems around, food, energy, security. People have got sick of waiting for the government to get around to sort things out. Guess where that came from? Didn't have to think
mhm.
too hard about that. So,
Mm,
so what's happened is that a totalitarian government has come into power called the One Party, and part of their new rules are, in order to try and conserve resources, they basically put a quota on everything: what you
mm,
eat, what you drink, the energy you use, and they put in place a one-child policy. Um, and this really came, I guess, because, well, I used to work for an environmental organization, and I actually ran a number of climate change research programs. And it is a subject very close to my heart, and I wanted to write a book that looked at some of these issues, but obviously in an exciting, slightly different angle. So I thought, okay, how would it affect the UK, and what would it look like, and what kind of different decisions would we have to make? And I was also thinking about all the crazy stuff that's been going on in the States around the abortion rules being reversed. And obviously, China did have a one child policy, which only actually was changed in 2015, was when it was lifted for all families. It's that recent that it was lifted and changed from one to two children. And then I think 8 years ago, or even more recently than that, actually, it's been changed again to three. But still, now in China, the government dictates how many children you're allowed to have. So I thought, actually, it's not that much of a stretch to think, well,
mm,
what if something like that happened here? What if we ended up with a extremely right wing authoritarian regime, and they decided, you know what, we are going to now put in place policies restricting how many children people can have, and we're going to start interfering in your rights around family. So those two things came together, because I thought, actually, with the climate change and all the pressures that's putting on, resources, that actually is a possible way things could go. So
mm.
I then did a bit more research, and then just thought through how might a one-child policy play out in Britain, and that's really where this whole idea took off. And so in the book, my main character, Kai, my main protagonist, she actually works for the government. So she works for the Ministry of Family Planning and Population, which is actually what it was called in China. That was what the policy, that's where it belonged. And her job is to enforce the one-child policy. And, as in China, what really happened is, these officials came to your house, and if you were pregnant for the second time, they could make you have a termination. So this is what Kai's job is. She is there to police the one-child policy, and she's a product of the regime. So she's signed up for this until she turns up to work one day, and all of a sudden, flashing up on her screen, she sees the profile of an illegal sibling, and she realizes it's hers. So now she has to make a choice. Does she protect her parents, who will be subject to severe penalties, or does she do her duty by the state? And that's really the whole premise of the book, is the decisions she makes. And she then goes on this amazing journey to try and find her sister before the state does. And what she discovers is there have been some horrendous lies, not just in her family, but in the regime she works for, and some pretty terrible crimes. So that's the book. Yeah, that's how it unfolds.
And that first chapter is absolutely heart wrenching. Think about Arenda books at the moment. Every book I read from Arenda seems to be something heart wrenching. But the first chapter in this book is, it made my stomach drop as a parent. It's like, what would you do?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I know. Well, it's just the most awful choice, right? Sophie's choice. And so, I think it's interesting. So been lucky. I've had some early reviews in from authors that have read advanced copies, and bloggers, because I'm in the middle of my blog tour now. And again, it's exactly this thing. What I always try to get to is, I do want books to have an emotional resonance, and for them to be plausible, because I do think that's why I don't go totally far end sci-fi. I always set my books in near future worlds where you can imagine yourself there, that, like, you can imagine it happening, exactly as you were saying, because I actually feel that's much more frightening. Because if it's a bit like the difference between Hammer House of Horror, and I used to watch Tales of the Unexpected.
Yeah.
Roald Dahl. And Hammer House of Horror, don't get me wrong, was terrifying. I always had a little escape clause in my brain, thinking, well, that's not going to happen because vampires don't exist, and people can't come back to life. Whereas with Tales of the Unexpected, the way he wrote them, I always used to have this horrible doubt in my chest, because he made it all very plausible. So that's why I try and keep things very close to reality, so that when people read the book, they can absolutely picture themselves in that world, going through that particular drama, because I think it's much more haunting, and I think it stays with you longer as well.
So that is One by Eve Smith, and
Yes.
that is out 20th of July, so it'll be out by the time the podcast is out as well. So go and pick up a copy. Go pick up a copy of the other two books as well. Again, Arenda have a really good back catalogue of amazing crime thrillery kind of books. So and Eve's book is absolutely one of these as well. So go and check out the brand new book. So I'm gonna have to ask, what is your second bloody good read today?
Well, funnily enough, nice segue, because this is an Arenda book, and it's
Ah.
by an author called Paul Hardesty.
I know Paul.
And it's yeah. Well, has he been on your? He's been on your podcast.
He either has or he's going to be.
Yay! Excellent. Well, he wrote. This came out earlier this year. It's called The Forcing, and it is an exceptional read. And it's also a cli-fi, if you like, climate change book. And his premise, I loved his premise, is that it's set in the States, and it's also when climate change has accelerated. And Paul he is an environmental scientist, and he's also an engineer, so he really does know what he's talking about. But his premise is that the youth have got so frustrated with the lack of action that they have basically taken power in the States with this sort of government of youth, and they have exiled everybody over a certain age to camps in the desert as punishment for effectively their carbon crimes. So you basically have to give up all your possessions. You're shipped off to these camps in the desert, and the main character is called Teacher. Who was a teacher, a professor, I think, and it's about his story about life in the camp, which guess what is not pleasant,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the resources start running out and all the provisions, and he realizes the only way to survive is they've got to get out of that camp. So a quite unlikely group of characters from the camp make a bid for freedom, and it's a really compelling plot line. It is beautifully written. He intersects it, so there's a present thriller plot line, and then there's this much more sort of poetic, beautiful plot line that we think is set sometime in the future, where somebody's talking and looking back to their past and talking about what they've witnessed, and it is really moving. I mean, it is talk about an epic read of what we stand to lose in terms of planet, biodiversity, people. He does paint a pretty dark picture of where we're headed, and it's I would really recommend it. It's very moving. It's a great thriller read, and it is extremely well informed because Paul does really know what he's talking about.
Mm. He was meant to come on the podcast, but we had to reschedule. That is why his name is very in my head. But
Oh,
he
great.
will be
Oh, well,
coming on
good.
later.
So hopefully he'll come on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, hopefully getting him on later on in the month. So not this month,
brilliant.
next month. So fingers crossed we
Yeah,
can chat to him a little bit later on in the year. So
good.
go and check it out. Very good choice, and it's always nice to have more render book choices.
Yeah, no,
um,
definitely. It's a great book.
so, what are you working on next? Are you working on your next book at the moment, or are you kind of taking a break?
Yes, no, I am. Yes, I'm trying to work on it, but it's pretty tough when you're sort of like full throttle promo for the one that's about to come out. So I have to
Yeah.
say I'm slightly yeah, I'm sort of switching between the two at the moment. So I'm in the planning stages for the next one, but it's coming together. And funnily enough, there is I can't say too much because I'm literally only still in the planning stages,
That's fun.
but there's a reason for my third book choice for you,
Okay.
because the subject is definitely, it's actually the book I've chosen was part of my research for book 4. Because I always read, so when I decide on the area, so I've already decided on the issue, I then go out and I read not just sort of non-fiction stuff. I also sort of scroll through and see what other books may have come out fiction-wise in the
Mm-hmm.
subject. Because obviously I don't want to rewrite a book that's already been written. So I tend to read around subject, both, sort of fiction, thrillers, whatever, speculative. So, yeah, I am in full planning stages for that one.
Brilliant. Well, great segue then. So, your third and final bloody good read. What have you brought along?
So this one is called The End Specialist by Drew McGarry.
Oh,
And I think it had another name in the States, actually. It's called Postmortal, The Postmortal, it was called in the States. And I hadn't come across Drew before, but oh my goodness, what a great writer he is. This one came out in 2011, and the premise is that a cure for aging has been discovered. That's kind of involves a bit of genetic tinkering. And after much controversy, the governments worldwide end up caving in to demand, and they make it available to everybody.
mm,
Now, it isn't just a cure for aging in terms of, you get to go on a few more years. Effectively, you are immortal. And oh my goodness, it is it's a very dark one. This one is
mhm,
definitely edging into horror. By the time you get to the end, I can tell you. And it takes place over 3 time periods, so it's also very darkly funny as well. So there's a great sense of humor in there, but it takes place in 3 time periods, just as the cure is developed. when there's still a lot of controversy about whether it should be legalized or not. Then, after it's been legalized, as it starts taking hold and spreading, and then the impact of that later on, like 30 years on, and just what that decision has done. Because as you can imagine, what would happen if we all become immortal? Well, guess what? There aren't enough resources to go around. There's not enough room to go around. And things start to go very wrong very quickly. And it's a great warning about, if you think that we should be going for this holy grail of living forever, read this book and it will make you think twice, that's for sure.
Awesome pick. Awesome pick. And got to end off with something with a bit of a horror twinge as well. So
Oh yeah, no, it properly gets pretty dark.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Eve, for coming on the podcast this week. Where can people find you if you'd like to be found?
Oh, I would always want to be found. Yes, and I love doing book groups and I love doing interviews. So yeah, please do. And actually, the books really do lend themselves to book club discussions because of these what ifs and these moral dilemmas. So always happy for people to contact me. I really love doing them. So my website is www.evesmithauthor.com. I'm on Twitter at Eve C. Smith, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook, Eve Smith Author. And I have to say, I'm a bit poor on TikTok, but I am on there. I'm just very sporadic, and that's also Eve Smith Author.
Are you threading yet?
Do you know what? To download that the other day, and my phone couldn't cope with it. So I will be. I will be definitely. I just need to clear some storage because I've heard it's actually a really nice space at the moment. So I would like
at the
to
moment,
get
yeah.
on Threads. Are you there? Have you done it?
Definitely. I started threading on the same day.
Yeah. I know. I literally tried to download it the same day, but I don't. Maybe it's because everybody was downloading it at the same time.
Oh, probably.
Yeah.
Awesome. Again, a huge thank you to Eve for coming on the podcast this week. Go and check out one. I'm really enjoying it at the moment. As you've probably seen I've got on Instagram, I've been kind of posting what I read on my journey. So I've been reading one recently and I'm absolutely loving it. So go and check it out.
Thank you so much, Mark.
No problem. As always, a huge shout out to our sponsor, Bottle Book Club. They're the UK's best and biggest They're the UK's biggest and best horror and thriller book box service, bringing the wonders of a haunted bookshop straight to your door each month. You can either get one or two boxes. You get the Bare Bones box, which is just the books, or you get the Full Guts box, which is a brand new book, a possibly haunted second-hand book, and also another indie title in there as well. You also get UK snacks, you get some hot drinks, you get badges. I always mention this. Nice canvas bag that time. I really like that canvas bag. But you're getting signed books in there because it's amazing titles as well. Got some really cool stuff coming up in the next few months as well. So do keep your eyes open for that. So go to Abominable Book Club at cratejoy.com and use the code BloodyGoodReads at checkout to get 10% off your box as well. As always, you can follow me over on Twitter at BloodyGoodReads, at Instagram at BloodyGoodReads, on Threads at Bloody Good Reads. And we've also got the Facebook group as well, which is mostly just authors peddling their wares, as they always do. So, as always, thank you for coming on the podcast. Yeah. So, as always, thank you for listening to the podcast. Go and check out our other podcasts on this thread, Bloody Good Screen Movie Club, where myself, Niall, Chloe, and Marcus, and sometimes author Hunter Shea, review movies. The one coming up this month, if I get my months right, is going to be Alien, Predator, and Alien versus Predator. Guess which ones we don't like. And also we've got some amazing stuff coming up in the run up to Fright Fest as well. Got a couple of films that we got some screeners for, which we're going to run through. I'm going to run through with Hunter later on in August. So go check us out in there as well, and give us a like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts as well. As always, I've been your host, Mark Goddard, and I'll see you next time.